All right. So welcome, Tamara. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being willing to share your story with us and your victory with us. I'm so excited to hear the wisdom that you have to share with us today. So to begin with, why don't you just share with us a little bit about your experience with grief, kind of the times when you've lost someone that you love, kind of when that was in your life, and share a little bit of the background.
Sure. Well, for me, the very growing up, I've experienced the loss of a grandparent, and I was able to manage that because of my faith. But what really hit me hard was when I lost a child. My daughter, when she died, she was 4.5. Her name was, or is, Melissa Marie. And Melissa died as a result of drowning in our bathtub at home.
Oh, wow.
And at that time, that was in 1987. So it's been 32 years. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think of her. So, and her loss had a tremendous impact and void in my heart at that time. I had 2 other children, 2 younger children, and a husband who was abusive and was not supportive. So it was a very lonely time as I went through that grief period. And so what led up to that her death was just a period of struggle, of just multiple things. And so when she died, it was like I lost everything.
I can, and were the other 2 children older or younger, or what were the ages of the other children?
The other 2 children, my next oldest, Timothy, he was probably about 2.
Okay.
And he was in the home.
Okay.
The youngest, Rachel, she was probably about 14 months old. And she was not in my home. I had just left the month before. And this occurred in Ohio. I was living in Ohio. My mother lived in California. And Rachel was diagnosed with failure to thrive. And so I took her to California for my mother to take care of her until she could nurture her back to health. I was working. My husband wasn't. He was to be taking care of the children, and he didn't. And so a lot of things. And so she was with my mother at that time. So it was just my son. And I just want to add this. My son, at the time Melissa drowned, I had gone to the store and my husband was home at the time. And so he wasn't upstairs watching her in the tub. And my 2-year-old son was next to the tub when the accident happened. And so we don't know what he saw, what he experienced. Now my son now is 35.
Did he ever have any recollection of anything? Like
he doesn't to this, and I know there is much healing that he needs. But he does not recall what happened.
Wow. So share with me if you I was about to say if you can remember, of course you can remember, but share with me kind of the initial shock of it all, and just kind of what you went through physically and mentally, what you can remember from the beginning.
Oh yeah, I can remember it like it was yesterday.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I had gone to the store, and my husband had demanded that I go to the store and get him something. And I remember telling him, make sure, and we were upstairs there at the tub, make sure you watch the kids. Please, stay. So I went to the store, and we were with my income back then, we didn't have much. And all I could think of is, what could I bring the kids home? Something to show my love for them. And I'll probably start crying. I always cry at this point. All I could think of was, I'll bring them home an orange. They love oranges. And so I am in the line at the store, and I'm just right around the corner. And the neighborhood children come running and said, and they called me Tammy. Tammy, you need to go home. Something horrible has happened. Something horrible has happened. I remember dropping the oranges and them just rolling away. I get to my house, which was right around the corner, and there is an ambulance. I get to the door, and I can see her on the floor, and the paramedics are doing the CPR. And my husband is yelling at me, "You can't go in." And I never really stood up to him because I was always afraid. I didn't care. I moved him out of the way. Right. And the paramedics said, we've got a heartbeat, but we don't know that she's going to make it. I remember my heart sinking, like, I can't lose her. And I sought the Lord. Lord, I know that you can bring her back to life. I pray this in Jesus' name. You can do this. And I believed that was going to happen. Right. And went to the hospital, and I just remember it kind of being a blur, feeling like, this can't be real. Yeah. This can't be real. Right. So talk a little bit about that, about what did that do to your relationship with the Lord, that the authority that you carry in the Lord, and that he is, that he can raise the dead, and that you prayed that prayer full of faith. Like, what did the loss of your daughter do to your faith and your relationship with the Lord? Well, I have to say, at first, I was very angry that she didn't live. I was very angry. So I spiraled into a very dark hole, and got caught up into alcohol and drug addiction. And that was something I never thought I would ever do. And they were drugs that I never thought I would ever even touch or come to know what they did. Right. But I did. And that lasted about, my addiction probably began in 88, so about 3 years. Okay. And so did you find that when you started to come out of the addiction, that you had grief stuff that was addiction a result of trying to numb and stuff, the grieving stuff that you were going through? Did you have? Yes. And later? And what took place was I had a near-death experience myself, from a drug overdose. And I had nightly on my knees begging God to take this addiction away, because I didn't want for my children to experience the loss of a mother. Right. And so that took place, and then I went into recovery. But then I also came to be a part of a church family. And I hadn't been. And I had been raised Catholic, and there's nothing wrong with that. My parents did the best they could. But there was something about feeling connected with other believers who cared about me. And so really I came out of that. I started counseling probably several years later. And so some healing began to take place. And then even further on, it started some inner healing with a counselor who was familiar with the Emmanuel approach.
Okay. So what what was the thing that was most surprising to you, shortly after what was the thing that just caught you off guard that you didn't besides the event itself, it's very unnatural and shocking to lose a child, especially in such a traumatic fashion, but what really surprised you about grief?
I thought about that, and I'm going to look down what I wrote, because sometimes I have to write things down because I'll lose what maybe the Lord wants me to say. And so I think what it was is the depth that I experienced, the depth of darkness, of feeling so angry and resentful. And why did you save the girl, the child next to Melissa? You saved her. Why not Melissa? Why did you not answer my prayer? And so it was just the depth of despair and darkness that I experienced.
And
I didn't know that.
how were you able to move on from that question? Like how were you able to
Well, I was able to
let
move on. It took me a couple of years. And had I don't know how to explain it. I think had my relationship with the Lord had been different, because I really wasn't connected to a church family. I occasionally I would go to mass, or I would go to the church and pray and plead, heal my marriage, heal my marriage. But I wasn't connected. I think that it wouldn't have taken so long for healing to take place if I had been connected with a church family. Does that make sense?
A healthy
A
family.
healthy one at that.
These are such good points, because, as I'm talking with people and doing these interviews, anger is something that everybody shares in their experience. And it could be anger at God, or anger at the person, or anger at the situation, but everybody has, and how well you deal with that anger so directly relates to how quickly you get healed and move through process. So that's a really interesting
totally
common
agree
denominator.
with that.
And the same thing with community, that we're designed to be in community. Healing happens within community, but not all community is created equal, and that's something that I really encourage people in the course, is to look at your community. And if you're not getting what you need from your community, to go find the community that can be that healing place for you. And that's what we try to, we have a Facebook group for folks, and that's really what we aim to be, even if we're not all in the same place geographically. But that loving support and encouragement, and just belief that you can get better and you can get side of this, because not everybody has that.
No, and the key thing too is that I remember trying to reach out to family members. And I remember on the day of the funeral, I reached out to a family member and I said, I really need my family right now. And they were having a family reunion. I said, I really need to be around my family. And this family member said, oh, Tammy, no, I don't think you should go. I don't want them to know the situation that took place. And that was like an arrow in the heart. And I cut myself off from the family. And so when you say healthy relationships, our family may not be the group that we need to go to. Our church family, healthy church family, is getting that connection. If that makes sense.
Yeah. No, that's so good. And especially when it's a like tragic or traumatic, sudden death like that. I know. So in my case, my mom committed suicide and my son died of an accidental drug overdose. And both of those things are like there's some stigma around it. There can easily be shame and stuff around it. And so it makes it harder to share and to seek out community because you can feel ostracized.
Mm-hmm.
Important. Another thing I share is family, especially, we have to recognize that they're grieving too, that they're going through their own grief process. So they might not be, for example, my sister was very close with both my mom and my son. And so she's going through her own stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
I can't lean on her or expect her to always be able to be a support to me because
Right.
grieving as well. And so I always recommend people to be around good community, but try to find the 1 to 2 people that you just trust that are positive and healthy and love you and that weren't super closely connected to the person that passed away, because they can be more emotionally available than somebody who maybe is in your immediate family or was more closely connected. But I'm so sorry. I'm just sorry to hear that your family wasn't there for you in that way and couldn't just love you when you really needed them to. That had to.
Yes, and even my mother, the person I would need the most, didn't come to the funeral.
Wow.
So I felt very alone,
Yeah.
and isolated. And what I've come to learn is that exactly what you said. Our family members have their own pain and grief they're dealing with,
Yeah.
and they may not be able.
Right.
And at that time, as I look back, they weren't able to embrace my pain.
Right.
So
Well, and
uh,
I find that especially for a parent who loses a child, right? That's every parent's biggest fear in life, is to lose your child. And so
mhm,
that do, it's really unsettling for a lot of other people. Like they kind of want to keep it at arm's length because they don't want to even contemplate, they can't fathom what you're walking through, and they don't want to, seeing you reminds them that that could happen to them someday. And that's, for most parents, for every, I don't know what parent that wouldn't be their biggest fear. So
yes,
it's really hard to find, most likely your circle of friends or your family are going to have a tough time really and being a support.
but I can say that coming out of that
Mm-hmm.
and rebirthing into a new relationship with Christ had
Mm-hmm.
everything to do with my healing
Mm-hmm.
and to the trajectory of where the Lord wanted to take me that I could not ever have seen
Right.
had it not been for the grief, and had it
Right.
not been for, I'm not saying that this happened because the Lord wanted me to do this, but He used that grief
Right.
to be able to allow me to minister to other people. And
Right.
so I was able, a woman who was very passive, who couldn't do anything really on her own. I could, but I didn't do things very well. But I went back to school, got a bachelor's, got a master's,
Wow.
and now a marriage and family therapist. There's no way I would have been able to see that back
Right.
then.
Right.
So the Lord has used this for His glory.
Yeah. And for your good, that's the promise, Romans 8,
Yes.
28. And that's what we really hope, in this course, depending on where people are with their grief. I mean, you have the benefit now of how, multiple years, and you can
Yeah.
see history that's been woven together. But when it first happens,
You can't.
pain is so blinding. It can be really
You
hard
can't.
to see, much less trust or believe that there's any way that anything good could come of it. But that's why I'm so appreciative to just hear other people's stories, because if somebody can see in you, like, oh, if I just keep putting one foot in front of the other, if I just keep believing that further down the road I'm going to see something pretty remarkable, pretty amazing, that life doesn't have to end. And like that's the power of your testimony. That's the power of this, of going through tough times like this.
Yes.
It's pretty amazing. Well, I want to ask, what's an example of, so as you began walking through this, and maybe in the beginning when you were kind of floundering and you weren't getting the support you need, like, can you remember, did somebody give you a really great advice that was helpful back then, or can you think of either example of good advice or bad advice that folks gave you that in hindsight you're like, oh, that was great, or that was really not good advice?
I think that the best advice was, and I don't remember exactly when I received this advice, um, but it was okay to feel the pain. And I
Mm,
think I was afraid to feel the pain for fear that the pain was so great that I wasn't going to be able to handle it.
yeah. Yeah, I totally get that. I remember with my mom specifically, I genuinely thought that the sorrow was going to swallow me whole. Like, I remember laying in bed and thinking my bed was just going to swallow me up because it was
Mm-hmm.
this like all encompassing, like surrounding thing. That's one of the things that was so surprising for me, especially with my mom, is just the physicality of grief, the way it affects your physical being. Like, you perpetually have the flu, like you're tired and you're achy and your thinking is screwed up and your appetite
Yeah.
window and you can't sleep. Like, it just takes a very real physical toll on you. But that is good advice to, it's a fine line, right? I mean, I believe it's a fine line that you can go one of two extremes. You can either not sit with the pain. I call it sit with the pain or sit with the sadness. If you don't do that and you stuff or you distract or you try to numb, it's not going to go anywhere. It's going to come out later in life.
Mm-hmm.
Extreme is to sit and wallow with it. I think it's one thing to let it have expression and let it have room, but there's a place where we can just meditate and commiserate and re-stir up all those feelings. And I know I've encountered that was my experience anyways with support groups. When
Yes.
I go to support groups, I found it was people that every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. they would just relive and reshare and cry, they didn't ever seem to be making
Yes.
forward, movement. And so that it's a little bit of an art and a dance. And I think you learn how to do it as you go, to just know yourself and know when your soul needs expression, if you need to sit and cry for a little bit, or if you need to write, whatever that looks like for you. But to make sure not to live in that place and, let
Yes.
those
Right.
feelings kind of take you on a completely different journey.
Yeah, and kind of going to kind of some bad advice that,
Yeah.
okay, is, and I still get it. I still get it because on Melissa's birthday, I do celebrate her birthday. I also, on her anniversary of her death date, I might do something.
What do you do to celebrate her birthday? And when's her birthday?
Well, what I do is the kids and I have grandchildren that live with me now, but we will celebrate her birthday, whether that would be, making a Facebook post and
Mm-hmm.
saying, happy birthday and having a little something. We have had a cake in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Don't do that every year, but,
Mm-hmm.
there are times where I felt that, we would do that. But I have people in my life will say, um, they're uncomfortable
Mm,
with grief because they
yeah.
don't know what to say.
Right.
They're afraid they're going to say the wrong thing. And so they'll
Right.
say things like, oh, don't feel sad. She's in heaven now.
Right. That's my favorite. I mean, that's the like such the cliche thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And they mean well,
They do mean well.
but they just don't, they're uncomfortable themselves.
Yeah.
Or, um, it's been a long time, Tamara. You should be over this.
Right.
Well, no, it's not something you ever get over.
Right.
And it's not the grief. I'm not in a grieving state like I
Right.
was. because I can remember her
Right.
and still celebrate her. I miss her. That's
Yeah.
okay to feel. I
Yeah.
miss her very much, and I can't wait to see her.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's so good. I honestly, I'm working on a book, and that's going to be a chapter. If not, I feel like I could write a whole book.
I know what you're saying.
Stupid things people say, and bless their heart. Like, I don't know if I'd rather have them say something insensitive or nothing at all, because saying nothing at all is even worse, because then
Hmm.
you just feel like now you're isolated and it just compounds the pain. But I'll just share two of mine, which just were appalling to me. So 1 month after my son passed away, I was at work and I was having lunch in the work cafeteria. And a coworker said, "How are you doing?" And I said, "Today's a really tough day. It's 1 month since my son passed away." And she literally said, "But other than that, how are you doing?"
Gosh. Oh my gosh.
I was like,
Poor thing.
I
She
was
didn't know
like,
what she didn't know. She
she
didn't
didn't.
know
And so
how to
I just instantly started talking. I'm like, "How are you doing?" I just started talking about her because I knew that
Yes.
didn't understand what she was saying. And then the other one, I was getting my hair cut and I was explaining to the woman the whole story. And I have a daughter as well, Piper. And she said, "Oh, well, at least you have another child. I have an only child. So if I lost my child, I would be truly devastated." That's,
I've had that said too. Oh, at least you have two other children.
it's like a pair of shoes or something.
Right.
Oh my goodness. I know. Bless their heart. So I really do think, so this course that I have is for the people walking through grief, but I actually might encourage people who are friends, or I may make a separate course, because I feel like there's so much just ignorance and fear around what to do and what not to do. And people really, the thing is, they want to help. They really want to help. They don't know how to help. And so
Yeah.
that's one of the things I talk about or help coach people, like when you're going back to work and stuff, to try to advocate for yourself as much as you can and tell people what you need, because they don't know what to do. They don't know what's helpful. They don't know what's not helpful.
Excuse me. Hmm.
And that's the other, help, if you can get that support person to
Yes.
be your advocate, because we both know that your brain doesn't work when this happens. You can't think clearly. You may not even know what
Shoot.
would be
No.
helpful.
Mm-mm.
So how great to have somebody who's a little bit removed, who can kind of just see like, hey, her house needs to be cleaned, or she hasn't eaten in 2 days, or, and to just advocate on your behalf. Because I just found that so unnerving that your brain shuts down, and then you have to make all these very huge decisions. Like there's all these big things that
Yeah.
and you're trying to do it in an incapacitated mental state. I just am always like, where are the helpers? You know what I mean? Like, where are
Yeah.
people who can help
Yeah.
you? You get more counsel when you're trying to buy a house, and that's when you have your wits about you. So I don't know what the answer to that is, but I really hope that we can come up with a plan and a system to get people help when they're walking through that.
Yes.
Because it's crazy to me that you're expected to make all these big decisions and go back to work and do all this stuff in such a short time frame when your thinking is so impaired.
Right. Right. Yeah. I remember looking back as you're talking about that during the planning for the funeral. I couldn't do it. I had my father and his wife helped to do that.
Yeah.
Now, and I remember the funeral directors and them trying to be very kind, but they're selling a product
Right.
at the same time. And so I couldn't think. I was
Yeah.
not good at that point.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very helpful advice.
Yeah. And things like, I mean, I understand not everybody can, but the funeral and the service is kind of like a wedding, in the sense that it's this very big event that you're going to remember for the rest of your life. And I personally encourage people, as even if you don't feel up to it, to try to speak or to try to write something that can be said. It's your one
Mhm.
opportunity to have a public, place to remember and acknowledge and share with the world, like, who this person was to you and what it means. I know I spoke at my son's funeral, and I'm so thankful that I did. Like, it was hard, and
Oh, yes.
I don't know how you did that, but I'm really glad that I kind of pushed through the
Yes.
illness or the fear of it to be able to do that. So, yeah. Well, you mentioned earlier, and I want to make sure we get to this last question because it's my favorite one. So you mentioned earlier that the woman you've become now, you really don't believe you would have become this woman without this grief thing. But what specifically, either personality traits or strengths or appointments, connections, like what are the things that you can point to in your life that you don't think you would have received had this tragedy not taken place in your life? What's the gifts you've received?
Um, and you cut out a few times there, but I think I know what you said. I think the biggest gift that I have is compassion and empathy. And I think that's what makes me a good counselor
Mm-hmm.
or therapist, is that I listen, that I can listen to people and I can listen to their pain, and I can compassionately and empathetically be there, be present for them.
Yeah.
Without that, I would not be able to do that.
Yeah. That's a really common one. And that's, because when you've walked through tremendous hurt and your biggest fear, yeah, you can feel people's pain and understand people's pain and sit with them in their pain. We can do the things that other people are uncomfortable to do, so that
Yeah.
people who are uncomfortable and don't know what to say and they want to keep their distance because the whole thing just makes them comfortable or uncomfortable. I think that someone who goes through something like this, exactly, you're able to be much more connected, and because it doesn't, at least for me, it's not as scary anymore.
Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
One thing I said is, like, when your biggest fear happens and you still are alive to tell the tale, it kind of makes you invincible. Do you know what I mean? Like, once you've faced and been through the biggest fear, it's like, oh, well, now I can take risks, and now I can, go to uncomfortable places because
Well, and as you say that, I'm reminded my husband's father completed suicide in 2004. And so
mm,
when that happened, we were connected to a church family.
mm,
In fact, my husband was an employee in the church as the custodian.
okay,
And so navigating through that death was much different
right,
than the death of my daughter, because we were connected. And I don't know why I said that. There was something that you said that triggered that. And
mm,
there was a connection. Now I can't remember what I was trying to connect it to. But I think what you said was that we can be there for people's pain, and we can sit with people, and because when our greatest fear happens, we're
right,
able to handle other, I
right.
think, grief experiences much differently. And I think that's what I was trying to connect that to.
Yeah. Yeah, and while we would all love to, whatever adversity people are facing today, like, we would love to think that this is the last time we're going to have to face heartache, and this is
Mm-hmm.
we're going to have to walk through something hard. But, like, I had no idea when I lost my mom that a year and a half later I lost my son.
Right.
So to recognize that this is an actual skill set and muscles that you're building, and that it's, God forbid something awful comes again, like, you're going to be more prepared. You're going to be able to handle it with more grace,
Mm-hmm.
and move through the grief process, hopefully in a more efficient fashion. And that's kind of the purpose for this course, is especially if it's the first time somebody's walking through it, to kind of give them our benefit and our insight of people who've walked through it before, so they can glean stuff from us and not have
Yes.
to not have to do the long thing the first go around, you know?
Right.
Yeah. Oh, it's such good stuff. Such good stuff. So when is your daughter's birthday? When will you be celebrating next?
Well, her birthday was September 13th.
Oh, so it was last
So she
month.
was born in 82, so she would have been 37.
Okay.
It's hard to believe she would have been 37. It's like, and the anniversary of her death is February 26th.
Okay.
And that was in 87. So it will be, how long? 32 years? No, 33 years.
Wow. So what do you do? What are some things that you've done for the anniversary? Like how do you mark that day, or what do you do?
When I lived closer, because I'm in California now, but when I lived closer, we lived in, before we moved here, we lived in East Tennessee. I would drive up to Columbus. She's buried in Columbus, Ohio. And so I would go to her gravesite. And then I would just, that day, the 26th is just a day that I set aside. Sometimes I don't do anything spectacular on that day.
Yeah.
This is just a day that I remember, and I just meditate with the Lord.
Yeah.
And I talk about her with my grandchildren, and they'll ask me questions and things like that.
And what about your husband? How has this been?
Well, this is my second marriage. I was able to leave the father of my children, and the father of Melissa. But my husband has been very supportive and has gone through some inner healing sessions with me. And so has embraced my grief and my pain in its deepest form during those times.
And Melissa's father, do you know at all how he's doing? Has this been?
I don't. I know that he remarried and he has another child who's in his 20s, and he did not have contact with me or the children as they grew up. My daughter has reestablished a relationship with him. And so I think this is a grieving point for him.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Yeah.
What his
Exactly what it looks
been.
like. Yeah. In his life. Yeah. Well, I'm thankful. I'm thankful for your healing. I'm thankful for your testimony. I'm thankful for your husband's support and love and acceptance.
Yes.
I'm remarried now as well too, and so it's weird for me that my husband, never met my son. My son was 20 years old when he died, and so he's walking through this grief with me, or he sees when I'm experiencing it, but he never personally. So it's an interesting dynamic, but it's a blessing for sure. He's a huge support to me, and I'm so thankful.
Yes.
Presence in my life. But awesome. Well, thanks so much for being with us today and lending your story and wisdom.
Oh, I'm so glad to share.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's really great. Just